Councillors, I think if you don't mind, I'd like us to reconvene. So, well, we're still waiting for the mayor, so I don't mind waiting for these two gentlemen. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we have a quorum, so I think we'll reconvene, and it is 7:15, as we said. Given the fact that we have left the discussion of the OP review report, we're going to move on down to our other staff reports, and that takes us to page 14 of your agenda, and the first report is CSD Staff Report 17-01. This has to do with governance of the Port Dover Harbour Marina. Before we get into this, I wonder, Councillor Wells, would you mind just sort of giving us a bit of an update relative to the community?
I would be pleased to do that. And first of all, I'd like to thank Bill for the report. It's some time coming, but it's good, it is a good report. So thank you very much. Just as a little history, Mr. Chair, if that's all right. It won't be long, but a little history. We were very fortunate when the federal government decided that they were going to build the marina in Port Dover, and they decided that they would turn the marina over to the city of Nanticoke. And the city of Nanticoke accepted it, and the purpose of the marina at that time was to offer service to the users, as well as to earn money for the municipality. Really, that was the whole function. And we took that over and did very well. And how we operated, Mr. Chair, and I was there in the beginning when it was turned over, is that an advisory committee with power actually ran the marina. And we had one goal, and that goal of council was to earn a profit. And we were very successful. And it worked very well until, unfortunately, the city of Norfolk County came around. And when Norfolk County came around, it wasn't quite a happy place, because Norfolk County, and it wasn't their fault, decided that instead of having a committee that would be responsible for it, maybe we should change it over to an advisory committee. Well, there's nothing wrong with an advisory committee, except it doesn't really have any authority except to advise. And it didn't really work as well as we did when we were the city of Nanticoke. Still had the same goal, and that was to earn a profit. And even the marina today is still charged with the same goal, and that is to earn a profit. And it's done very well. Mr. Chair, this report was coming, and I knew it was coming, and I apologize again to Bill, because we've had two groups of people who suggest that they would like to do something and offer their services to the Marina Board. One, Rick Benning came here several years ago and made a deputation to Norfolk County Council suggesting that he would like to lead a group to offer his services as a service board and operate the marina as a service board. And I had a call, I think today, from Paul Lipset, who is also interested in offering his services and a group as a community-minded group of citizens who would operate the marina with help as an advisory committee. So what I'm suggesting, Mr. Chair, in the motion that I'm going to put forth is that we table this report for 1 month to allow anyone within the community to come before us and make their pitch as to whether or not they would like to offer their services as an advisory board, or whether they'd like to offer their services as a service board, and then we, as Norfolk County Council, would make a decision on, do we want to accept either, none, or what do we want to do? So that would be my motion, Mr. Chair, that we table this for 1 month and bring back the report at that time.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I think under the circumstances that you've described, that's a very good motion. Anyone wish to speak to this matter first before we deal with the motion? Mayor Luke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Councillor Wells, I will support that motion. I mean, we've been, I almost said fooling with this. We've been waiting, and not just waiting, but we've been working on this whole report for some time to come forward, and here it is finally. And very clearly speaking to the motion and supporting it, I certainly am in agreement with the options of looking at the possibility of an advisory committee or possibly an MSB. I certainly read the report, and I want to thank staff for it. It's very well laid out. I believe Mr. Robichaud did the lion's share of it. No, Mr. Cridlin did. My apologies, Willie. So thank you for bringing this forward. So I'll support the motion, but I really think that a month to 6 weeks hence, it's time to make a call on this and get this off our plate and come up with the best that we can. And I think, Mr. Chair, in supporting the motion, I think it's important to hear again the advantages. And I know that there's some financial restrictions on a county-owned facility, on bank accounts, writing checks, et cetera, et cetera. But certainly, I'm willing to just put this off to hear again, because we, as Councillor Wells rightfully said, we did hear a fair amount of interest in options of operating this marina.
Thank you. Councillor Brunton.
Well, I can support the motion. I have had a few people call me, I guess, that are just boaters down there, but they certainly have concerns. But I guess the bottom line is if neither group show up, we got an easy decision to make, haven't we? So anyways, thanks.
You're welcome. Any further speakers? I won't ask the deputy clerk. I think I can capture the motion, Councillor. Councillor Wells has moved that this matter, this staff report be tabled for a period of 1 month, and obviously we'll come back at that time. Those in favor of that motion? I see no one opposed to it, so it is carried. Thank you very much, Councillor. Our next report is Staff Report EBS 17-05, which is our annual accessibility status report. And we have staff. Ladies, welcome, and I'll turn it over to you, Shelby, then.
Shelby.
Thank you.
Thanks. Mr. Chairman, the purpose of this report is to seek approval of Norfolk County's 2017 Status Update Report. In 2013, the county released its first multi-year accessibility plan in accordance with the Integrated Accessibility Standards Regulation. The county has since released annual status reports in 2014, 15, and 2016. The annual accessibility status report outlines accessibility initiatives and achievements from 2016 and looks ahead into 2017. Highlights from 2016 include corporate policies and procedures being updated to reflect the legislated changes to the customer service standard. Training for new staff hires is now completed within their first day of employment. Corporate customer service feedback and complaint process was updated, including both the brochure and the online survey. Procurement information was updated to reflect accessibility legislation. Training was provided to staff on creating accessible documents. Website accessibility auditing tools were purchased to scan our websites for accessibility compliance. And accessible trail signage was updated throughout the county. The annual status report reaffirms the county's ongoing commitment to meet the requirements of the AODA and its regulation to make our county inclusive and accessible to all. And if there are any questions of council, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you very much for your report. I see at least a couple of speakers, Councillor Brunton and then Black.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to staff, I guess my question is on page 27. The barrier-free access capital projects, just a question on all, well, I think there's only 4. Is there more on the next page? No. Those 4 capital projects, I guess my question is, how many are mandatory and how many are just, we're going to do them, I guess, that aren't mandatory?
Through you, the chair. The projects came forward through the capital budget and were reviewed by our Accessibility Advisory Committee. Some of them came forward as requests from the public or complaints. So through the accessibility legislation, we do have to review any complaints received and look at ways to address them. The legislation for design of public spaces does outline specific requirements, for example, on audible pedestrian signals. So any new or reconstruction of existing pedestrian signals, we would have to ensure are in compliance.
Okay, I guess I'll ask this question through you, Mr. Chairman. Accessible beach in Port Dover, I know we approved that, but were we, I can't remember, were we obligated to do that, or is it just something we made a decision on that we are going to do it?
Through you, the chair, to Councillor Brenton. It was actually a complaint that was received. We received 2 complaints in the past, and then a request from a business owner in Dover as well for the initiative to go forward. But accessible beaches is also outlined in the design of public spaces for compliance with accessibility. So since we did receive the complaints, there's a need to review them and address them and meet the legislated requirements outlined.
So you're saying we could not have turned that down, or we could have?
Through you, the chair, to Councillor Brenton, we could be challenged if we don't go forward with it. Since we did receive complaints, we could be challenged in a human rights case. We don't know what exactly would have happened until that situation arises, but with our compliance reporting to the ministry, we do report at the end of 2017, so there may be questions on there if we are in compliance with accessible beaches, so that would be a difficult one to respond to if we did receive complaints and didn't address the complaints that came forward.
Okay, well, I'm still not clear. You're not really telling me whether we absolutely had to do that. I mean, they funded part of it, and we agreed to proceed with it, but if we had said no, all you're saying is we could have been taken to the Human Rights Commission. Is that correct?
Through the chair, if I may, we had an obligation to review the request because of a complaint. Council could have certainly turned down the request,
right,
but the likelihood of a human rights challenge would have likely gone forward. So as you can see, we were successful with a grant application because clearly the provincial government thought the project was worthy and had the necessary funding, partial funding, for us to move forward. So yes, we could have said no, but there may have been a consequence down the road.
But I guess that's the thing we don't know, right? Okay. No, it's interesting as these things come forward. It's nice to know some that are to me mandatory that we have to do versus optional, if I could use that word. Thank you.
You're welcome, Councillor Black.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, through you to staff. And this report, is this the report that actually is submitted to the province? Like, we have to do an annual report to them as well, right? Is this it, or is there another one?
Through you, the chair, to Councillor Black, sorry.
Black.
Yes, we are required to report to the ministry on a biannual basis. So we have an accessibility compliance report that the ministry asks us specific questions in regards to accessibility, but the legislation does outline that we have to post our accessibility status report on our website, have it available to the public, provided in accessible formats upon request. With our compliance reporting to the ministry, they could ask for a copy of it, yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any further speakers? Mayor Luke.
I would like to move the recommendation in the report.
Thank you very much. Mayor Luke has moved that staff report EBS 17-05, the annual accessibility status report, be received as information, and that Norfolk County's 2017 annual accessibility status report be approved. Speaking to the motion, Mayor Luke.
Well, Mr. Chair, just 2 quick statements. First of all, I want to thank Shelby, and I know Shelley is here with her, and I apologize for my back, but I do want to thank them for all they do. And I did also, when I read through this, wanted to state that on page 25 of 39, which is the first page of the annual accessibility status report, and it says under our county's commitment, and this is Norfolk County's commitment. Norfolk County's statement of commitment establishes the vision and goals for the county to meet the legislated accessibility requirements. Yes, that costs money. Yes, it was downloaded to us from the province. But I believe that our staff are carrying out the commitment of this council to meet what the law says we must meet. So I appreciate the work they do. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Any further speakers to the motion? You've heard the motion. Those in favor? I see no one opposed. Thank you very much for that report, ladies. And I think we can then move to our third report under the staff report section, and that is staff report FS 17-05, collection of occupant water and wastewater arrears through property taxes. Mr. Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This report comes to council as a result of a discussion that happened when Earth Holdings, Inc. was awarded the contract for water and wastewater billing back in the early fall or late summer. Council asked that we bring forward a report to add to do this, and what it would take to do this, and what it would mean, and so forth. So that's what this report is. I'm not going to go over the entire report, but what I'm just going to do is try and highlight a couple of points in it. There's about 4 different options the council can follow. The status quo is what we've been doing, what Norfolk Power was doing, and Hydro 1/MBSI was doing, is
Excuse
basically
me,
not
councilors,
a lot of,
sorry, councilors.
not a lot of follow-up on uncollectible accounts, because what they would do is just, they'd send out reminder notices and things like that, but they weren't really aggressive on it, and we ended up having to write off substantial amounts of uncollectible water accounts. They ranged all over the place. Some years it was over $100,000, but $65,000 to $100,000 is not unreasonable. So if we continue with that process with Earth, we're likely going to see something similar to that, although Earth's a little more aggressive in their reminder notices, but there's still going to be a huge amount of write-off. We could increase the collection efforts ourselves and put some more teeth into it, but that has a price tag attached to it by hiring somebody to do the collections. And when we talked about this back in the fall, that was not something the council found particularly palatable. Whichever one of those 2 status quo options we take, it's still going to be more costly to all of the ratepayers, and staff would not recommend it for that reason. The second option is to shut off the water, and we talked about that way back in the summer, fall as well. There's some challenges with that because we have single services going to a property with multiple tenants or multiple occupants connected to it. So if one person isn't paying the water bill, then we can't shut that person's water off. So if we shut the water off for the whole building, 3 people out of 4 get penalized because the 4th guy's not paying his water bill. We looked at, I looked at with the folks in Public Works and Environmental Services, is can we get a list of those people where it's possible to shut the water off? And what their response was is, yes, we could. It would be a pretty heavy administrative process to try and determine when somebody's account isn't paid, whether they can go and shut the water off or not. And it would require that accounts be treated differently. If you're in a situation where we can easily identify your water service and shut it off, then you're going to get your water shut off, and that's how we'll collect the account. If you're down the street, you got a building, and we can't easily identify that because it's one service to the whole building, we've got to go through a different process to collect that amount. So staff is not recommending that option because it's a little clumsy and we think it would be difficult to administer. Requiring occupants to pay a deposit, there's some municipalities that do that, not very many, but some do. Excuse me. That would be easy to implement for new clients. I don't think we'd be able to do it, require it retroactively for existing clients. Managing the deposit accounts would also require some additional administrative effort. There's no guarantee that we'd catch all of the arrears because you could very easily have an outstanding amount that exceeds the deposit. And as my compatriot in Public Works said, if we did use the deposit up, do we go and get another deposit? So it becomes a bit of an administrative problem. Many of the municipalities that have done this are opting out of it, and I don't think it's a particularly good option. The second last option, which to me is probably 100%, solves 100% of the problem, but creates another problem, is that we bill the owners and not the occupants. So 100% of the water and wastewater charges would go to the owner of the building, and the owner of the building sorts it out with his tenant or occupant in terms of what amounts apportioned to him or her. That would totally eliminate any arrears because the owner would be responsible for the whole thing. I suspect that would not be very well received by owners. That's probably an understatement. And while this would totally solve the water and wastewater collections, staff can't recommend this or wouldn't recommend this because it's not fair to the owners where occupants are being diligent and paying their accounts by giving them that additional administration for their tenants, their occupants. So the recommendation that staff is making is that, and it's staff's preferred option, is that the water arrears be added to the tenant bill, or the water arrears of the tenant or occupant be added to the owner's tax account. The Municipal Act provides that they may be added. It's permissive but not mandatory, but council can make it, can permit it. In the report, there's a timetable that we've drafted in consultation with Earth. We haven't worked all the wrinkles out in it yet because Earth is, focused on getting all of the water billing, et cetera, fully operational by the end of this month. Once they're finished, we're going to sit down and have a review of this process with them. But conceptually, what's there is something that they have suggested as a might be, and I'm intentionally using weasel words because we haven't sat down with them and sorted it out. I can't give you an actual implementation date because it's really dependent upon when Earth is finished what they're doing now, and we can collectively commit resources to doing this process, to setting up the business process. I would expect it won't be later than mid-year. And in the meantime, we will be providing, if council approves this, we will be providing multiple communications to the property owners so that they're aware of what the upcoming process might be. And that kind of covers the whole land, Mr. Chairman, and I'm ready to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ford. I have at least two speakers, and I'll start with Councillor Wells, Height, Black, and then Brunton.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'd like to first of all declare up front that in my previous life, I have been a landlord. I am now willing to say that I do not have a conflict of interest this evening because I am no longer a landlord, just so everybody understands that. But certainly I read this report, and as a previous landlord, I can truthfully say that I could not support this recommendation. That does not seem fair. I certainly understand why the county wants to get paid. Everybody wants to get paid, Mr. Chair. There's no doubt about that. But to transfer the responsibility over to the landlord doesn't seem to be fair at all. What would the landlord have done to get himself or herself in debt with regard to this water situation? You rent your building to a tenant. Part of the tenant's responsibility might be to look after the water. And if that's the case, they should pay for the water, not the landlord. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will not be supporting the recommendation. Nothing wrong with you bringing it here, I just won't be supporting it.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Height next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the Treasurer. While you were doing the research on your report, did you find other municipalities that do it this way?
Through Mr. Chairman to Council, it would be a significant majority of the municipalities that run their own water billing or provide water billing to their clients, to their customers. A significant number of them, excuse me, either charge the owner of the property directly or follow the preferred option that we've presented where the arrears are added to the owner's taxes. Some of them have those two options plus requiring a deposit and some other nuances, but a significant majority of them, I think I had 22 or 24 municipalities I'd circulated back in the spring, and I think 18 of them do either directly to the owner or add the arrears to the owner.
Okay, so in that research, like, how many municipalities allowed the delinquent accounts to be charged to their water and wastewater customers, as it were, by not collecting this money? That's what you're doing. You're passing that loss down to those other customers.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I don't know their exact profile. I don't know their exact budget and their financial reporting and all of that. But I would suspect that the amount that would be absorbed or be charged back to the other taxpayers, other ratepayers, would be minimal, because they would get it all from the owner. Excuse me, directly if it's charged directly to the owner, or indirectly from the owner when there's arrears. So if you follow the logic with those two, you should have none that would be charged to all the rest of the ratepayers.
Right, so they use a fair system is what you're saying to me. Now, my next questions are the timing that you ask about these letters to go out. There seems to be an awful lot of tree killing through letters. There's one phone call, and then I believe there's 3 letters after so many days, and by the 39th day, that's when it gets transferred to the landowner? It's page 33 and 34.
What happens is they get a couple of notices go electronically, and when we get to the 29th day, there's an IVR call, and letters are sent to the occupant and the owner at the same time. So there's no question about the fact that they haven't received it, but any other notices prior to that are all by IVR.
Okay, so am I assuming that at day 39, the water gets cut off and it goes right to the landlord?
The water isn't cut off. What happens on day 39, if it hasn't been paid by day 39, on day 40, we're going to move it to taxes, without question.
Okay, that seems awfully fast for me, because I don't even think Bell or any of the electrical companies will do it that quickly. Was that the average time that you found through?
Through Mr. Chairman, that's a proposal that we put in front of council. If council says, it really should be 49 days, we can schedule a program around that. How we pick the 39 days between us and Earth is if you start at the beginning and then 7 days later and 10 more days and 14 more days, that's how you get to 39. We didn't come up and say, let's use 39 days.
Right.
We could put a longer period in each of these intervals. So instead of the first call goes out and says, you've got 20 days to pay, not 17. And the next call goes out and says you've got 24 days to pay, not 20, and move the whole thing along. I don't think that timing is an issue. The whole concept is the one that we'd like to see approved. And if council would like to see that, there's a little more time in there, or that there's a 4th reminder before the final hammer is dropped, I have no problem with that.
Okay, now how would that get directed to you? 'Cause I'm thinking 60 days myself, because that's 2 months. If somebody's gone for a month, they come back and they got a bill.
Well,
It's cut off.
I don't think that, we're not asking for council to approve this schedule. What we're asking for is the council approve the adding water arrears to taxes. Based on the conversation, if council feels that it should be a 60-day time frame, we can certainly work a business process out to that. If the council wants to put that in as a resolution, I don't have a problem with that either, but if the consensus at council is that 60 days, we'll develop the plan around that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. And just for clarification, I guess for my benefit, at no time does the report or the recommendation say the water would be cut off, correct? The milestones are just to attach the arrears to the tax bill.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman, because what we found out is that shutting off the water is extremely difficult because you have multiple occupants with a single service. So it's very difficult to shut one of the 4 off or one of the 6 off.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, councillors, I lost my list here. My next speaker is Councillor Black.
Mr. Chairman, and through you to Mr. Ford. Okay, I understand that the authority comes from the Municipal Act and that other areas have implemented this. But the way I look at it is totally illegal, except for the fact that the province is doing it or allowing it. Has there been any court challenges? Are you aware of any landlord who has been imposed these unfair, unjust charges that have absolutely do not benefit them one way or the other? Has there been any court challenges?
To my knowledge, Mr. Chairman, there hasn't been. However, I'd like to respond by adding an additional comment. If you look at the provisions within the Municipal Act, and I put them in the report intentionally, it says that the municipality shall provide a public utility to a building that lies along the supply line with a water or sewer public utility. So if somebody is on the sewer line, municipality is obligated to provide water and sewer service to that building. Okay? The Act says that the fees and charges may be imposed on persons other than the owners. So we charge it to the tenants or the occupants because traditionally that's how we've done it. But that's also permissive legislation that we could very easily not charge it to the owners or to the occupants because the Act says that we're required to provide it to the building and we may charge the tenants.
Okay, so just another question, thank you for that. I know some buildings, it's just one service, and the landlord pays it all, and it's part of the rent, so no big deal. They're already paying it. And many other landlords have had that situation and think, well, okay, tenants' use of the water would be more responsible and be less if it was in their name. So then they go to a big expense and separate that. So the main feed goes in, and then let's say there's 4 apartments, and then it branches out. And each one of those tenants now has the responsibility and has, contacted the county or their agent to set that billing up. They are now the responsible individuals to pay for that. And there should be some access, I would think, to be able to shut each individual, if there's 4 of them in there, to go into a boiler room or a utility room of the owner and shut one off. Like, when they split them up like that, they're all individual and they have individual shut-offs. So I don't understand why you can't go in like in a multiple service and shut each one off. Because there is a separate meter, a separate water meter, and a valve that you can turn off.
I'm going to ask Lee to respond to that because this is a technical question that I'm not capable of answering, but my understanding is that you're not 100% correct.
Ms. Robinson?
Certainly, through the chair to council. Once the water service crosses the property line onto private property, that is a plumbing issue. It falls under the building code, under the plumbing section of the building code. Individual shutoffs for a variety of units is not required by the building code, nor is it required through the plumbing aspects of it. It has been our experience that the majority of buildings do not have individual shutoffs beyond the shutoff at the property line. So in the case of a fourplex, there's a single water service that comes to the property line. That's where the valve is. Once it crosses the property line, it splits and goes into 4 different units. It may have 4 different meters on it, but there are not 4 separate shutoffs. The shutoff is located at the property line, which means if there was a single unit that was not paying, the other 3 were, and we went to shut off the water, all 4 units, including the 3 tenants who are paying properly on time and are up to date, would all lose their water. The further complication is gaining access to the property. If there is an individual shutoff, it's not owned by the county. It's not a piece of county infrastructure.
Okay.
It's owned by the property owner. So in this case, it would be the landlord. And we have to get permission and the ability to access those. A lot of the time, what we find is if people have developed for over the years, for whatever reason, put in individual shutoffs for those types of things, and I will say that most people probably don't exercise their water shutoff on a regular basis. I don't know too many people who monthly go downstairs and turn off their main shutoff for their house and then turn it back on. Over time, they seize. When we go to turn them off, sometimes they don't fully turn off the water. Sometimes they break. They cause a leak. So for the county staff to go into a private thing, do that, God forbid it snaps, we could have water spraying everywhere, and we'd now be responsible for all the damage caused by that. So most facilities are not plumbed in such a manner that every unit has an individual shutoff. And if they do, it's not the Norfolk County doesn't have the authority to do an individual shutoff on that. We have the authority to shut it off at the property line. And our struggle is that you don't want to shut off the water at the property line where there are people who are paying their bills on time and appropriately would no longer have water when the control for that is outside of their hands.
Okay, and I understand exactly what you say about, valves not being operated regularly and they get seized up and break and what, I've been there. So if the landlord was smart then, I guess if he was plumbing his building, he would have all of his feeds from the sidewalk into the building with all the meters out on the street, right? And then that way, they're all individual and on the street, if it was a smart landlord, I guess.
Through the chair to council, the location of the water meter is not related to the shutoff. You can have a meter located anywhere with respect to that.
But then the shutoff's on the street then?
The guidelines, et cetera, the ministry guidelines associated with that strongly discourage more than one feed to one particular piece of property.
Well, of course they could, because now they can go bill the landlord. Anyway.
Well, the Ministry of the Environment really doesn't have anything to do with the Municipal Act. But from a safe drinking water point of view, every connection to the municipal water main, which would be each one of those services, weakens the municipal water main, and it causes problems from a long-term infrastructure point of view. That's why we don't want to have 17 connections for 17 units in this thing. You want one connection to that area, and then you want to have it branch off after that.
Okay, I absolutely appreciate Mr. Ford and Lee's comments. But I agree with Councillor Wells, or what's his name over there? Is it Councillor Smith? And I agree with him. Understand the dilemma of Norfolk County, and we're trying to, recoup some of these costs from irresponsible people not paying their bills for, I guess, whatever reason. But how can you say this is a just and fair thing to do to unload in a landlord who has never used the water, and they have no idea what that bill might be? All of a sudden they see a bill, whoa, where did that come from? And they may be tight to the line on their bills, and the next thing you know, they're not able to pay their taxes. I just can't support it.
Thank you. My next speaker is Councillor Brunton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll say right off the bat, I can't support it. I haven't been a landlord at one time and been through some of the headaches that come with it, but the Landlord-Tenant Act is written in such a way it's all in favor of the tenant, nothing to do with the landlord, the way I see it anyways. But I went to see a few buildings on the weekend because I wanted to make sure there are large apartments, at least in Simcoe, that are one service, and as Councillor Black says, the rent covers their water bill. But to cut that water off, you've got other problems with safety, with fires if one tenant isn't protected. They got Siamese connections, I'm not sure on the buildings. Some of them have that, and whether that would be cut off for fire protection or not, I don't. It's a tough one to go in and cut the water off. But my question, I guess, through you to staff, Mr. Chairman, would be when a person who rents an apartment and I'm referring more now to residential, of course, if they rent an apartment and they request a water hookup, is there a hookup fee? I believe there is there not, Lee?
Yes, there is. They do pay a fee to have it's the account setup fee, not a hookup fee.
What do you
If they're putting in a new service, that's a whole different thing, but I'm assuming you're basically, it's an account setup fee.
Okay, and that's a one-time fee, they pay it, and then if it's in their name, they pay the bill from there on forward, correct? For
That's
water.
our intention, yes.
Okay, now, if they are delinquent in paying after a certain amount of time, why do we not have a list of these people that don't pay their bills? So if they move out, they move someplace else and want to hook up, they're on a list. You know who they are.
Certainly, and that is something that we do and we do maintain, and we have run into that on several occasions. But people are creative. Accounts are opened in different people's names. It's in order to have a water account, you don't have to have proof of residence at that location. Because lots of people, for example, some landlords choose to pay the water bill and their tenants pay them back. So you don't have to, there's lots of different situations. Some people are just starting out, they don't have any credit, whatever the case may be. Other people put it in their names. There's a couple, one time it's in one person's name, one time it's in a second person's name. So we most certainly do keep a list of people, but the difficulty is if they don't move, and they're in, say, a fourplex, where if we turn off the water, we don't have any ability to stop them from using the water, and they could continue to do this for years. And as long as they're still in that building, we can't stop them from using the water, which in turn is being paid for by the rest of the water users and the wastewater users in Norfolk County, because that is part of our operating costs, and it has to be factored back into our rates. Our rates are they go up on an annual basis because of the cost, and council has repeatedly asked staff to look for ways to reduce our costs, and this is one of the things that this is a cost, because we can't, if everybody had an individual water shut-off valve, it would be easy. We could go to this property line, turn off whoever wasn't paying, and we would be able to mitigate our losses. But if we have a tenant in a unit and they don't pay the bill, and we can't shut off the water for that specific unit, there's nothing we can do to mitigate that loss. They could, in theory, turn the tap on and leave it running 24/7, 365. I mean, when we see those, we actually do, if we attempt to reach the tenant and we don't, usually it's from a leak, all of a sudden we see a spike in use, we will actually contact a landlord and say, we need to get into this unit, we've got a water loss happening, and it's not clearly somebody using it and not paying the bill. There's something clearly going on, and usually the landlords are nice enough to let us into the facility to try to figure out what's going on, because the reality is that if there's a leak, that water's going somewhere, so it's probably damaging the landlord's property.
Well, I'm not arguing with you on that. I'm just saying that chances are if he's not paying his water bill, he might not be paying his rent also. Or right. But I just don't, if you've ever tried to get a tenant out of your apartment, it's not easy. You struggle with, you can go to a lawyer and do all you want, but you virtually got to go in there and throw them out. That's the way I found it in the past. But anyways, all I'm saying is there's enough headaches at being a landlord that, you screen these people. And if we screen them a little bit on the app, or the time they come in to hook up or ask for water service, or what do you call that, Lee, again? Billing? Get on the billing cycle?
Billing setup.
Account setup? Okay, that's the word I want. Then, I think over time, these people, especially if they're going to live here in the community, you're going to catch up with them eventually. My question again to Mr. Ford, if I may. Did you say our total is around $65,000 to $100,000 a year?
Through Mr. Chairman to Councillor Breton, the charges, the write-offs, I should say, that we've been charged back for have ranged anywhere from 65 to 100 to 120. We got a notice in December that MBSI, Hydro One's associate company, is going to be billing us for $140,000 for write-offs. If you go back a ways, when Norfolk Power did the water, did water and hydro billing, they would